बोधितां भगवता नारायणेन स्वयं व्यासेन ग्रथितां पुराणमुनिना मध्ये महाभारतम्.
For today's discussion, I had requested that we read that piece on responsive hearing as a preparation for the discussion. In any kind of a study that we do, it's helpful to know what exactly is happening. Even when we read works of fiction, any authentic piece of writing is the author pouring oneself out into the book, even if it is a novel. And when we read a book, we are engaging with the author, not directly, of course, it's in a printed page, but we are entering into the world that the author creates. Now I'm speaking about fiction here. And if it's a well-written piece of book, we get identified with the storyline. We might get identified with a certain character in the story. At that point, what we read becomes ours. It's no longer something that belongs to the author. The author has put their views, their ideas, their vision in that book. But when I read it and I start interacting with it, it has become mine. And so it's not always that important what the author is saying, because what the author is saying and what the intentions behind that was, only the author knows most accurately. The rest of us can only guess. But that's not as important as me as the reader, and here this book in front of me. What am I hearing when I read those same words? And we may not always hear the same thing. We might read the same word, but we may not always hear the same thing. And that was the central idea behind responsive hearing. That whether we are reading something or we are hearing someone, there is one kind of hearing is just the knowledge of the language and the sound that we hear. But the second hearing is how I respond to it. The word that gets often used, especially in spiritual study, is swadhyaya. Now that comes from a Sanskrit word, adhyayana. Adhyayana means study. Now when we say swadhyaya, it often gets translated as self-study. And that's no doubt one good way to translate it. But a deeper meaning behind swadhyaya, it's swa adhyaya, self. Swa is self. It's not that the study is being done by the self, but the study as it applies to oneself. And therefore, in scriptural study, as well as any spiritual study, what becomes very significant is what I read and what it means to me. And therefore, it's helpful not to read too much at a time. That's even those who have made it a practice to read daily something from the Gita or from the Kathamrita, the Gospel of Ramakrishna, or any such text. It's helpful to not just keep on reading, because the goal in such cases is not to just finish the book. There is a story that often comes to my mind. This was told to me by one of our senior monks of the order. Sometime back in the 50s, earlier than that, probably in the late 40s and 50s. In a Bangalore center of our order, we had a great monk by name Swami Tyagishanandaji. He was a profound scholar and a very advanced spiritual soul. And so he started giving a class to the young monastic novices in the Bangalore ashrama. It started with the Isha Upanishad, which is one of the very small Upanishads, Isha Upanishad. It's also the longer form is called Isha Vasya Upanishad. And so he began the study of that Upanishad. And because he knew so much and he could go into such great depth, the very first verse in that Upanishad, that discussion itself went on, I don't know the exact number, maybe 5 or 10 classes, just the first verse. So these young novices who were wondering, like, how long is this going to take? And so one day when two novices were chatting at some other time during the day in the monastery, and they were saying, oh God, we haven't moved past the first verse yet. When will we finish the book? At this rate, will we even get to study anything else? Because this one first verse of the one small Upanishad itself is taking so long. Now they were just speaking among themselves, but Swami Tyagishananji happened to pass by, and he happened to overhear what they were saying. Now, he didn't say a word. He quietly went to his room. And then the next day, the next class, in that one class, he finished the entire Upanishad. And then after finishing that Upanishad, then he told these young brahmacharis, are you happy now? Are you satisfied? Now you can go and announce to the whole world, I have finished that Upanishad. And of course, they understood that was not the whole point of study. So that is one thing we all have to be careful about. Even when we have conversations with our friends and fellow devotees, it's not about boasting how much you have read, or how many lectures you have attended, or for how long you have been going to an ashrama or a Vedanta society. That's not the point at all. The goal is not to finish anything. The goal is not to finish the book. The goal is to understand, how much have I understood? Sometimes people ask, how many Upanishads do I need to study if I want to study Vedanta? Or what is the order in which these Upanishads need to be studied? And the answer is, there is really no order. You can study in any order you want. In fact, there is not even any need to read too many Upanishads. Each verse of the Upanishad has the potential to liberate me, has the potential to make me free. So even if I read one verse from the Upanishad and go into the depths of it, understand the layers of meaning, and if I can truly understand what that verse is saying, I will be liberated. Then there will be no need even to finish that Upanishad. So the goal is not to finish it, but the goal is to then, that's where this responsive hearing becomes very important. Therefore, the dialogue in the Gita, although it is between Krishna and Arjuna, when I become attentive to what the book is saying to me, it gets transformed into a dialogue between Krishna and me. It's no longer Krishna saying something to Arjuna several thousand years ago in some distant place in India. It's now Krishna speaking directly to me right now, right here where I am. When that happens, then that study takes on a whole different color. It becomes very personal. Then it becomes Swadhyaya. Then it becomes a dialogue between Krishna and me. Now that's true with regard to all other texts as well, not just the Gita. So when we read the New Testament, when we read the Bible, when we hear Jesus speak, in the book, he may be speaking to the people around him. But if I place myself among that crowd, then I see that Jesus is saying those words to me. When we read the discourses of Buddha, we see Buddha is speaking to me. When we read the Gospel of Ramakrishna, it's easy to see that as a historical text, that this is what Ramakrishna said more than 100 years ago to a handful of people who had gathered around in that room of his in Dakshineshwar Kali temple. This is what he said to them a long time ago. So then this conversation that I'm reading in that book, I've already created a distance between me and that conversation. It's already gotten separated from me by more than 100 years. That's so separated by time and separated by space, because it happened in a very different part of the world from where I am right now. How can I then connect with something that is separated from me by both time and space? And there could be more barriers separated through language, the language barrier, which is overcome to a large extent by the translations. There could be a barrier of culture, there could be so many barriers. Now, if there are all these barriers in between, then the teaching will take a long time or may have difficulty entering into my heart. So we need to remove those barriers. In order to remove those barriers, I must find myself sitting in Ramakrishna's room in Dakshineshwar. So when he's saying something to Narendra or Rakhal or any of these other people in the room, I must say he's saying that to me. You will see that when that happens, the words that we read acquire a very different flavor, a different power. So that's what responsive hearing is. And we seen, those of you who have read that piece know, and we discussed it last Sunday as well as a Sunday prior to that, how the first part of the second chapter, which we are going through now, when Krishna describes the nature of the Atman, a responsive hearing would be, he's really describing my nature. And then we saw how all of those things he said about the Atman, I can replace it with the first person. That it's not just simply that the Atman is invincible, the Atman is indestructible, but I am invincible, I am indestructible. And if that doesn't make sense, either intellectually, or if it's not something that we are experiencing right away, because our present experience is very different, that is because I haven't yet acquired the clarity of mind. And to acquire that clarity of mind is the practice of Karma Yoga, which we discussed last Sunday. How that purifies my heart, and purification of heart really means acquiring clarity of vision. Now, what happens to someone who acquires that clarity of vision? What happens to someone who actually experiences their true identity as the Atman? And that's the question Arjuna asks Krishna. You will see in verse 54, Arjuna uvacha sthita prajnasya ka bhasha samadhisthasya keshava sthitadhiv kim prabhasheta kimasita vrajeta kim. Arjuna said, what is the description of the person of steady wisdom merged in samadhi? How does this person speak? How does this person sit? How does this person walk? So Arjuna is asking Krishna, that you have described what my true nature is. You have told me what I should do to get that experience. Now, I want to know, someone who has done all this, how do I identify this person? How can I know who is this person who has had this experience of the Atman? And then Krishna describes in verses through 55 through 71 the characteristics of what we sometimes refer to as a person of self-realization, a person who has realized God, a person who is enlightened, a person who is illumined. There are different ways that state gets described. One way to describe that is the state of Jivan Mukta. Jivan while living, Mukta, one who is liberated while living. Now this is important to remember. The state of ultimate fulfillment that the Gita presents us is not something to be attained after death. To go to heaven, we have to die. Well, to go to hell also for that matter. So, heaven or hell can be experienced only after death. So, it's only a post-mortem experience. But in order to be spiritually liberated, in order to realize God, I can realize God right now, right here. And therefore, that state is called Jivan Mukta, a person liberated while still living. So what Arjuna is asking here is, how do I identify that person? I think that's a good question, because it would be nice to know how such a person lives, how to know such a person. And then Krishna gives a long description of how this person is. One obvious thing we all will have noticed when you read that description is that description is not really helpful in identifying a person who is an enlightened soul. Why I say it's not very helpful? Because all of those characteristics are really internal. Once Holy Mother Sharda Devi said, what happens when a person realizes God? Does that person grow a pair of horns? If it was something external, then we could say, oh, I see that characteristic, and therefore we know, we are able to identify. Now, presently, the pandemic through which all of us are passing, so we know what are the characteristics of someone who is infected by the virus. And then we have all these characteristics. But the person might be, there may be cough, temperature. That's why sometimes people are now checking temperature just to make sure this person is not infected. And there are several characteristics are mentioned in some advanced case, of course, difficulty in breathing, fever, loss of taste, diarrhea, you name it. There are lots and lots of things. And all this would have been helpful so that we can identify. The problem is, now then they just say, well, there are a few cases which are asymptomatic, which means externally you have no way of knowing. No, it's not exactly identical, but the state of enlightenment is asymptomatic externally, by and large. I say by and large because what is inside, we cannot completely hide it externally. So clearly, if someone is experiencing a deep inner peace within, that peace will somehow show itself in the way the person talks, the way the person moves, way this person deals with other people, it will show. If the heart is filled with love, without making any overt effort to be loving and kind, one doesn't have to try to become loving at all. But if the heart is filled with love, that love will show itself on its own through every word. That love can show itself just through a look. So, if someone is enlightened, that enlightenment may show itself, not in very obvious ways, but there are sometimes we'll find people who, just being in their presence, you feel calm, you feel peaceful, you feel uplifted. Now that doesn't necessarily mean that they are enlightened, but we know that something has changed inside by which those characteristics are coming out. So that's the only way an enlightened being's characteristics may show itself in some very subtle ways. But it's not always easy to know who is enlightened, who is not. Especially when you read in Sri Ramakrishna's conversations, he says, we might have some very fixed idea about, oh, this is how an enlightened person is. But like everything in life, enlightened people come in all different shapes and sizes, and not just externally. By that I mean different forms. Sri Ramakrishna himself says in his conversation, sometimes the enlightened person can appear to be very calm, very peaceful. Sometimes might appear to be even crazy. All these different descriptions you would have read in his conversations. In fact, Sri Ramakrishna himself, many people thought of him as a very crazy person because he seemed to be doing things not exactly the way we find people doing. And those of us who have read Ramakrishna's life are familiar with the different assessments people had about him. Some people saw him just as a regular priest. Some people saw him as a kind of a crazy priest. Some people saw him as a saint. Some people saw him as a good person. And some others saw him as an avatar. And so you have a whole gamut of assessments. And so I just mentioned this to emphasize that there is no foolproof way to identify an enlightened person from outside. So then what's the point? Why would even then Krishna take all this trouble to describe it when you cannot even identify the person from outside? Or it's not too helpful in identifying from outside. And the reason is, this description is not so much to recognize an enlightened being outside of me, but this description is to show me what I need to do in order to become enlightened myself. Because I may not have the ability to look into someone else and see what's going on in their heads, their minds, their hearts. We judge people only by their external appearance. But we know, every one of us knows what is going on in our own heart, in our own head, in our own mind. And therefore, it is so much easier to use these characteristics that Krishna describes, not to find out whether someone else has those characteristics, but to find whether I have those characteristics myself. So these characteristics in Sanskrit called lakshana. So the characteristics of the enlightened beings become the disciplines to be practiced by the unenlightened. I have mentioned this incident on earlier occasions, but I'll mention it again, that one of our novices, sometimes in the 50s on the West Coast, in a San Francisco monastery, I believe, went to the Swami, was the Swami Ashokanandaji, was a great monk of our order. And so this novice had been at the monastery for a few years, maybe 5 or 6 years, I guess. And he was beginning to assess how much progress he had made. And he found, to his dismay, not much. And so he went to Swami Ashokanandaji and asked him, what more do I need to do in order to become enlightened? I haven't become enlightened yet. What do I need to do in order to become enlightened? When will I be enlightened? And then the Swami told him, what are you waiting for? What do you think you will do when you become enlightened? Why don't you start doing now what you will do then? Because if we have a certain idea in my head, this is what an enlightened being is, and when I become enlightened, I will do these 1, 2, 3, 4 things. I don't have to wait for my enlightenment to do those things. I can start doing it right now. Now we might say, well, I'm not enlightened yet. So I'm an unenlightened person trying to live like an enlightened being. Is it possible? Yes, not perfectly, but it's possible. Why can I not make effort to live like an enlightened being now? And clearly, because I'm not enlightened, I'm going to fail 1,000 times. It's going to require enormous effort, a tremendous amount of willpower. But every time I fail, without getting discouraged, I say, no, I'm going to do it. And I will succeed. Even if I don't succeed 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, maybe if I succeed in living like an enlightened being for just 5 minutes, even 5 minutes is not easy, but if I can live like an enlightened being for 5 minutes, even 1 minute, there is hope. Because if I can live like an enlightened being for 1 minute, maybe if I push myself a little bit more, if I work a little bit harder, maybe after a few days I can live like that for 2 minutes. And I try harder, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. And this way I can go on increasing. So I can begin by at least being part-time enlightened and then work my way towards becoming a full-time. So sometimes people might get a part-time job and say, well, if I work harder, and they might like my work and they may employ me full-time. So this is not exactly same, but the idea, you get the idea. And this is true with regard to everything in life. Someone might see a great a musician, one who plays the piano or a sitar or a violin, just any instrument. And we might get inspired seeing some of these ustads playing and say, well, I would like to do that. And you enroll yourself in a class or you start taking some lessons. And we know you want to be an ustad, but right now you are not. So the very first day you start playing those instruments, it's going to be nowhere like an ustad. But that's the goal before you. So you in your mind try to do everything what the ustads did before they became ustads. I mean, no one was like a born ustad. There's a tremendous amount of practice. There's tremendous amount of tenacity and dedication involved. So if I not try to employ that dedication, that practice, that tenacity in my own life, I will start taking the first baby steps. And if I can continue like that for day, one day I'll be an ustad myself. So that's the idea. So the characteristics of the enlightened become the disciplines of the unenlightened. With that in mind, those of you who have seen that piece on responsive hearing will see that we have these at least 6 points which become a guideline for a spiritual seeker. So this is what Krishna is really saying, Arjuna, not in these words. He is really describing the characteristics. But if Arjuna, we don't know what Arjuna heard, we don't know how Arjuna's mind reacted, but here now, as I said, it really doesn't matter how Arjuna's mind reacted. What matters now is that if I'm a student of the Gita, how does my mind react to what Krishna is saying? And one of the ways in which my mind could react to those great verses from 55 through 71 is at least these 6 points. So let me just go through them very quickly, one by one. I must make an effort to remove all desires from my mind and remain content within my own self. Just a short footnote to this. Desires often get demonized in spiritual literature. Remove all desires. And we might say, why all desires? So first step would be, let me remove all desires that take me away from God. All desires that take me away from my spiritual ideal. Or if you want to make it even more general, any desire that makes me weak in some way, fulfillment of which will make me weak, either physically, mentally, morally, emotionally, that's a bad desire. Any desire that will make me strong, again, to all these different levels, that's a good desire. So, if I have a desire now, because of this lockdown and social distancing, many of us have been spending a lot of time at home. But if someone says, I have a desire now to take more regular exercise every day. I have a desire now to take some long walks. Of course, with all social distancing intact, take long walks, and that's a good desire. We can't say, oh, it says remove all desires, so no more exercise from tomorrow. That doesn't make sense. So, first of all, the first step is all desires which will make me strong in some way are okay. Keep them. But eventually, I must reach a state where there should be no desires. Because think about it this way. Desire involves wanting to get something or to want something. Now, wanting involves a lack of something within me, because I only desire things that I don't have, or I desire things that I want more of. So there is some kind of a lack within me. Now, as long as I have this sense of incompleteness within me, I cannot be an enlightened being. One characteristic of the enlightened being is that sense of fullness, purnatva. You feel purna, you feel full. And so, desires are a symptom that I am not complete yet. So when I'm full, I am filled, then I won't want anything. So that's why to remove all desires from that standpoint and remain content within my own self. Because if I desire anything outside of myself, my fulfillment, my joy depends on something outside of me. Then I am not free again. Because anything that is outside of me can be taken away from me. Nobody can take me away from myself. So if I can find all the joy within, I don't depend on anything outside of me, I am the happiest person. To remain, I must make an effort to remain unshaken by adversity, free from fear and anger, and not run after pleasure. All of these things, fear, anger, being shaken by adversity, all these things disturb the mind. And if the mind is disturbed, I am still affected by external circumstances. An enlightened being is not. So if I can now practice to be free from all of these, I am going nearer to my goal of being enlightened. I must make an effort to be unattached, avoiding excessive celebration of the good or bitter hatred of the bad. In Ramanuja's Sri Bhashya, the commentary he wrote on the Brahma Sutras, he enlists of some qualities that are necessary for the development of bhakti or devotion. But those qualities are necessary not just for bhakti, really for any spiritual pursuit. And among the list, he has these two qualities. One is called anavasada and the other is called anuddharsha. And that is exactly what is mentioned here. Anavasada means to be always morose and sad. Anavasada means not to be morose and not to be sad. But anuddharsha, the opposite, the other extreme, or just excessive celebration. Like I can't, if I'm happy, I can't contain my happiness and I just want to jump about. And then Krishna is saying, no, just keep it under control. Yeah, of course, everyone has a right to be happy, but keep your happiness under your control. Now, why should I keep it under my control? This is important. The sensation of happiness passes through the same nervous system through which the sensations of sorrow and suffering go. So the goal is to have control over one's own nerves. And if I cannot control my joy, I will not be able to control my sorrow. And that is why excessive joy or excessive sorrow, I must try to be grounded. Try not to be overwhelmed by these things. I must make an effort to control my senses and to cultivate the ability to withdraw them when needed and to focus on the Supreme. This is obvious. All of our senses, the Katha Upanishad has a beautiful verse which makes this clear, that how all of our senses are programmed to go out. If I just open my eyes, I don't have to make any extra effort to see what's in front of me. The eyes will automatically go and grasp all the color and form and bring the information to me. All of our senses just go outward. And that's why the truth which is really here, I remain oblivious of the real self, of myself, because all my senses are projected outwards. And therefore, I need control over my senses. The practice of prayer, worship, meditation, japa that we all do is really a practice, first of all, for controlling the senses. Because only if I'm able to control my senses which are projected outward, make them turn inward. Only when my mind, which is always running outside, I can make it turn inside. Only then will my prayer, will my meditation, will my japa be effective. Whenever we feel upset that we get distracted during meditation, that it's difficult to concentrate, the reason is our senses are not under control. Our mind has a mind of its own. Our mind goes wherever it wants to go. Our senses go wherever they want to go. How can I meditate? How can I pray? So I must get these naughty children under my control. So every person is like a mother who has to control these wayward children who I have no control over. So all these, in one way you could say, every one of us has 11 children, 10 senses and a mind. If I can get all these 10 children, 11 children under my control, I'll be a good mother. And a mother who can love, but who also knows how to enforce discipline. If I can do that, then the quality of my meditation will improve. I must make an effort to be calm, but that is the only way to peace and happiness. This is so obvious. Vivekananda was said in his Karma Yoga lectures, the calmer we are, the less disturbed our nerves. The more shall we love, and the better will our work be. So no matter what, we will see, if we remain calm in life, through all the upheavals that are going on outside and the upheavals that are going on within, if I can keep calm, I will be able to navigate my way through life in a more mature way, in a more intelligent way. I will make fewer mistakes, because most of the mistakes we make in life are not because we didn't know what was the right thing to do. But at the moment we decided to do something, the moment we took a decision, we made a choice, we were not calm then. We were being swayed by our emotions, by our desires, swayed by a bunch of other things. But if I had just remained calm, I would have made the right choice. And therefore, remaining calm is very, very important. And finally, I must make an effort to abandon the sense of I and mine with regard to the material world. Sri Ramakrishna says again and again and again, a message that comes from both the Gita and the Upanishad as well was the root of all mischief, the root of all trouble is the sense of I and mine. And we know this from our own experience. The only time in a 24-hour cycle when we are free from the sense of I and mine is when we are fast asleep, when we are not even dreaming, in a state of sushupti. And every one of us is so happy, so free. Dreams could be nightmares. Our waking experience could be troubling. But deep sleep, universally, is the most peaceful, most joyful, most restful, most freeing experience. Why? There is no I and mine there. So what the Gita wants us to do, what Krishna wants us to do, is that freedom from I and mine that I have in deep sleep, why can I not recreate that experience while I'm awake? And for a bhakta, for a devotee, an easy way would be that whatever I see as mine really belongs to God. Not just my material possessions, but what my skills, my knowledge, my talents, my energy, whatever I see as mine has come through God's grace. Now that's one way I can loosen. My I and mine may not vanish overnight, but at least I will loosen the hold that I and mine have over me if I bring God into the picture. That's one of the ways we can deal with our I and mine. So I will stop here now. We'll have a 5-minute break, and then we will take a look at some of the questions that are there. Om Jananim Saradam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhur Muhu. Okay, so lots of questions. We'll take a look at them. It seems being unattached and not being like a wall, as you have said before, at times feels difficult. It's hard to allow emotions to surface and not get involved. Any guidance on how to deal with this? Yes, I agree that it's difficult, of course. All of these things are difficult. We should make a distinction between difficult and impossible. Yes, it is difficult. If it were not difficult, everyone would have been enlightened right away. So the fact that very few of us are enlightened at any point in any generation is because it is difficult. That's why we need to be very brave, very courageous. It's not helpful to lose heart. And therefore, the only way is to just practice. So keep calm and deal with every emotion. You don't have to, it's not about allowing emotions to surface. It's in fact good to keep emotions under control, and in spite of the control, if they surface, we just have to deal with them. So yes, I agree it's difficult, and the only way forward is to remain calm and to deal with everything as best we can. And through practice, all of these things do come under control. But practice is the only way. Is being able to find and be in the company of enlightened individuals a blessing? Of course it's a blessing, because the importance of holy company, the benefit of holy company has been described in religious literature, cutting across traditions, whether it's the scriptures dealing with bhakti or the path of devotion or knowledge. In any such scriptures, we find that the importance of being in the company of someone who is enlightened is always stressed. It's a little bit like we are on a big life's journey, and if we meet with people who have been on this road before, then they might be able to help us find our way correctly, or warn us about the dangers on the way and tell us how to overcome them. So yes, holy company is definitely very, very helpful. With increased focus on spiritual life, involvement in secular life reduces. This causes others in family and friends to have a negative reaction. How do we tackle this perception? I think it's important at some point to eliminate the distinction between spiritual and secular, because dividing our life into this is the spiritual part of my life, this is the secular part of my life, although in the beginning we all have such compartments, eventually the goal is to break down all the walls. Much talk about building a wall, but I think in spiritual life we have to break these walls. Only when these walls are broken, our lives will become undivided. To some extent, we can say that an authentically worldly person also has no walls. If a person is worldly, that person sees everything in secular terms. Even if such a person would go to a temple or pray or worship, even that would be done to achieve some secular goal. So it's secular viewpoint all through. Now, if I want to be spiritual, an authentically spiritual person, when I break the wall, everything must become spiritual for me. So the distinction between secular and spiritual has to vanish. Let other people see. You can't stop other people from making these divisions. And that's their problem, not your problem. But as a spiritual seeker, my problem is I must look at everything from a spiritual standpoint. And one simple way to do that is, can my spiritual ideal or God become a part of the equation no matter where I am, no matter what I am doing, no matter what time of the day it is? That's the thing. Now, one might think, well, just having your breakfast or lunch or dinner, there's nothing very spiritual about it. One might even think it's a secular activity. But if one of the ways in Vedanta societies we begin by chanting Brahmarpanam Brahmahavi or any other prayer before meals that people might have, that's a way of bringing God into an apparently mundane activity like eating. So even the act of eating can get spiritualized if I can associate God with it in some directly or indirect way. Whatever jobs that we do to earn our livelihood, we might say, how can I bring God in there? One way of doing that would be, no matter what job we are doing, we are using our skill, knowledge, and talent to execute or to carry out the work that we are given. A spiritual seeker can say that the knowledge and the skill that I bring and the energy that I bring to do this work have come to me through God's grace. So, but for God's grace, I would not even be able to do what others see as a very secular activity. So somehow God gets associated with the work that we do. Now, obviously, the work that I do or whatever secular thing that I do has to be ethical, has to be moral. It will not be possible. I mean, people can still pretend it to bring God into an unethical activity, but that doesn't work. And so long as what I do, it might be secular in the eyes of many, but so long as it is ethical, so long as I'm not breaking the bonds of morality in doing that activity, then for a spiritual seeker, that work can be spiritualized. And that's what we need to do. So everything should get spiritualized in life. A reader's response may or may not necessarily lead to the absolute truth. The reader may lose sight of the goal in the maze of meanings produced by his reading. Is there any ideal way of reading to realize the truth beyond the truths of the mundane world? That's why we had commentators. That's why we have teachers. So we have to make an effort to read and understand. And if our understanding is not correct, we'll know through our own experience. We'll end up applying what we have learned from a book into something, into some activity, and we might find, oh, I tried to follow the teaching of the Gita and it has brought me so much pain and suffering. Now, one gut reaction would be, the Gita is wrong because it just brings me more pain. The other way would be, my reading of the Gita may not have been perfect. What I understood from that may not have been perfect. Or what I heard, my response to that and my effort to put it into practice may not have been perfect. And then how to then put it into perfect? I can take the help of some trustworthy source, could be my friends, my teachers, my elders, or a lot of literature that's already available. So yes, guidance will help me to do that. But we can't be so dogmatic as to say it will not lead to the absolute truth, because it might also. So we can't make a generalized reading that this will not do so. In some cases it might, in some cases it might not. When it does not, one can take the help that is always available. Besides self-resolve and determination, is there anything else useful to control our senses? Well, clearly there has to be either this overwhelming love for God or a desire to lead spiritual life, because one might have all the requisite qualities, but if there is no desire to reach the spiritual goal, then it's like you have a car, it's in a working condition, its tank is filled, there is gas, you don't feel like going anywhere, then it won't happen. So there has to be a spiritual goal in addition to a firm resolve and determination. But living as an enlightened being, even when we are not, isn't there the risk of feeding our own pride and ego? No, I don't think so. Because even when I'm trying to live like an enlightened being, if I'm honest to myself, I know I'm not enlightened. I should be humble enough to never forget that I'm an ignorant person trying to live like an enlightened being. So if I'm just a beginner in even learning music, in my mind I can think I've become a big expert. But anybody who hears me play that music, they'll say, no, you are no expert. So that own pride and ego would be just a lack of self-knowledge, and we have to guard against that. How can we humbly play at being enlightened? No, we are not. I wouldn't use the word playing at being enlightened. I would say I'm trying to live the way an enlightened being lives. I'm making an effort. An enlightened being lives like that without effort, because that's natural for an enlightened being. Now, I'm trying to do the same thing, but with great effort. So I should not forget that I'm ignorant, but I'm trying to do what someone more accomplished than me has been doing naturally. So yes, if we are not careful, we might forget that I'm just trying to do that, and then pride and ego can come. And that's why one has to be very alert to avoid the problem of ego, because ego is really the major hurdle. There was this one saying Ramakrishna used to say, when will I be free? When I, quote unquote, I shall cease to be. When the ego gets out of the way, we can be free at that moment. What are the 10 senses? Well, these are the 10 senses called, senses in Sanskrit are called indriyas. The 10 senses are 5 senses of knowledge and 5 senses of action. The 5 senses of knowledge are the senses that bring us the ability to see, to hear, to smell, to touch, and to taste. These are senses of knowledge, because through these senses we have knowledge of the world. And the through senses of action are the hands, feet, and so on. All the senses which help us do activity in the world are called senses of action, and all the senses which bring us knowledge are called senses of knowledge. In Sanskrit, they are called jnanendriya and karmendriya. How should I design my first day as an enlightened being? That's your homework. Design it yourself. I don't think anyone else should decide how should my day begin. And I think we have to design it ourselves. And there is no one perfect way to do it. So we just have to design our own first day of enlightenment. Why wait for another day? You can begin right now, this very moment. So your enlightenment practice begins now. Okay, let me do it this way. I'm going to ring a bell. And from this bell onwards, all of us will begin our practice to be enlightened being. Okay? Get ready. When Krishna speaks of withdrawing the senses, is he referring only to the physical senses which respond to the physical world, or do we have internal created senses as well? Withdrawing external senses is a little bit easier, but withdrawing the mind, which is really the internal sense, is not so easy. It's a little bit like if I love ice cream, and suppose my doctor has said, you've been eating too much ice cream, just reduce it or stop it for some time. Then I can withdraw my senses. I can not go and buy more ice cream. Or there's an ice cream in my refrigerator, I can stop opening it to get it. So I can stop myself from doing it. but the desire might still be there. And therefore, Krishna is referring to both. But the first thing within our ability to do so is first thing to withdraw the external senses. Even external senses, not that easy. I mean, think about it this way. If I don't want to see something, I can close my eyes. What about sound? Well, now you got noise cancelling headphones, and taste and touch. We can do the best we can in at least shutting the senses from the external world. But the real struggle is with the mind. And so Krishna is here speaking about both the senses and the mind. But the first step is the senses, next struggle is with the mind. If I see all I and me as gods, that would apply for my weaknesses too. But how can I assign a weakness to the infinite and pure? The weakness, and both really, our idea about strength and weakness are really ideas that are connected with the body and mind. And so not only my weakness, even my strengths, all of these are seen as connected with body and mind. So when I speak about I and mine, there is such a thing as, well, mine is clearly, there are objects involved. But the I, just the pure sense of I is not as problematic as I am this. For instance, I can say, I'm wealthy, I'm a scholar, I am great, I am this, I am that. That I is problematic because that I is attached to something. But just I, without attached to anything, is not that problematic. And it's getting rid of even that I, that subtle I, not attached to anything, that occurs at a much higher stage. But right now, we are dealing with I and mine as related to material objects, and those material objects are invariably connected with my body and mind. Two important practices mentioned are Abhyasa and Vairagya. How do you reconcile Karma Yoga with Vairagya? Karma Yoga is all about Vairagya. Because if I am attached, then I cannot practice Karma Yoga. In fact, the key practice in Karma Yoga is detachment. And therefore, please, we will come. The next chapter of the Gita does deal with Karma Yoga. So we will see, and we have already seen to some extent last Sunday, but we'll see in future as well how detachment is a key practice in Karma Yoga. Karma Yoga purifies the mind, which is important when we begin spiritual life. But can't the other yogas also be helpful at the start, even if they are more helpful once the mind is 100% pure? It's possible to see that the first thing all the yogas do, not just Karma Yoga, is purification of the mind. In fact, all the yogas, even if you see them as four distinct paths, they begin with purification. So Karma Yoga purifies in one way. Bhakti Yoga, through God's grace and love for God, that purifies the heart. The path of Jnana does that through just philosophical abstraction, to separate myself from everything that clouds my judgment, everything that I see as an impure. So, and then Raja Yoga, of course, through mental discipline and inner discipline to contemplation. So all the yogas help in purification. That's true. I remember Sri Ramakrishna considered newspapers as worldly, unholy, and wouldn't touch them. In our practice of enlightenment these days, we can't skip news 100%, can we? Of course we can, we don't have to. So if we find, I'm speaking specifically from a completely spiritual standpoint. If we find that anything in life, including the news, if it is intruding during my prayer or during my japa or during my meditation, then that's a one good indication that either I'm not digesting that news well, or I'm overdoing it, or I'm taking in so much that my mind cannot process it enough. But if we find that reading the news or seeing what's happening in the world around, if it is helping me understand the nature of the world, helping me better understand the nature of existence, that's fine. Or even understand human nature for that matter. But if it interferes in some way with the quality of my spiritual life, then I might have to make some changes. Either reduce this inflow of continuous news or find a better way to digest it. So we come to the end of our questions today. Thank you very much for some very, very good questions. I've had very good feedback from people through emails and so on who enjoy the question answer sessions we have, and especially the quality of questions that is asked. So keep it up. I encourage you to continue studying. What we are seeing, as I said in the beginning, are just general themes discussed in the Gita. So before we meet next Sunday, I would encourage you to make your own individual study of the second chapter. Go verse by verse if you like, and see whether any of these ideas that we have discussed so far have made it easier for you to, or do they shed a different light or a better light on your understanding of the second chapter. So when we meet next week, we will begin with the themes that we encounter in the third chapter, which is really a question that Arjuna asks Krishna about the relative place in our spiritual life between work and jnana. Karma yoga, the path of work, symbolized by karma yoga, and the path of knowledge. So which of these is better, which of these is greater, what I should do, the kind of questions that all of us have. So we will address this next Sunday. So let's conclude now with a prayer. May the Divine Being, who is the Father in heaven of the Christians, Holy One of the Jewish faith, Allah of the Muslims, Buddha of the Buddhists, Tao of the Taoists, Ahura Mazda of the Zoroastrians, the Great Spirit of the Native Americans, and Brahman of the Hindus, lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May we be granted strength, freedom, and clear understanding. May we learn to see God in our own hearts and in everyone around us. May God bless us all and fill our hearts with gratitude, grace, and love. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto us.